Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 104 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. This week's tip comes to us from special guest Stuart Rice.
If someone comes into the store and buys something, we always like to brag at the water cooler, right? I got that sale, blah, 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 blah. It's great. And then if a customer comes in or you have a sales presentation and they didn't buy, what do we tend to do? They were dumb anyway. They weren't. Stay away from that. If we're going to talk at the water cooler, let's talk about the things. If we did have a successful sales presentation, we did have a sale, what are the things that we can take away from that particular sales presentation that we can use and make it repeatable? Let's share it. What is the thing that you did when you nailed it? What was that thing? Because there was probably at the most 3 moments that really kind of defined what that sale really, really became. On the flip side, walking away from a sales presentation and going, well, that customer didn't have any money, that doesn't help anybody. What was it about your sales presentation that you lost the customer? And sometimes it is money, but I guarantee you could probably find a product on a floor or a service that you could sell that would totally work for that customer. It's just, it was the easier way out to go, they don't have any money. So for me, it's taking the 2 to 3 minutes afterwards. This 2 or 3 minutes is talking about 2 or 3 minutes. Take the 2 or 3 minutes afterwards to really define what worked, what didn't. And don't be so quick to dismiss a customer after they didn't buy. It's a great time to give it a learning experience. And the more ears you can give it to, you can probably find out where it is that you missed your mark.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Stuart Rice. Welcome back. Stuart and I have had similar career paths, separated by a few years. We both started out selling consumer electronics before transitioning over to the vendor side of retail, before then joining or creating educational initiatives to help others be more effective in their careers. Key skills that are helpful in retail are also helpful in public speaking. You have to learn about your audience. You have to connect with your audience. You have to bring your audience on a metaphorical journey with you. You have to focus on what's in it for them and why they should care. And, of course, storytelling with a focus on benefits is a key part of it all. People don't buy things because they need them. They buy things because they want them. The logic and the features and the details of an item you're selling are what people use to justify their decision to buy. But if they don't feel an emotional connection, if they don't feel that they actually want to buy it, they won't buy it. And it's the same when you're speaking. If you can't help your audience feel an emotional connection to what you're saying, they're not going to buy your points either. So storytelling becomes key to all of that. And Stuart is good at it. Stuart Rice has 24 years of experience in sales, purchasing, and management, focusing on strategic growth. Training is his passion, and Stuart looks to use his experience and ability to communicate to share his knowledge, ability to critically think through problems, and use real-world scenarios to develop processes and strategies that can promote growth with individuals and institutions alike. In addition to professional training, though, Stuart's other pursuit is comedy, specifically sketch comedy on the very accurately named Sketch Comedy Podcast Show. A one-of-a-kind show where interesting people have intriguing conversations and then improvise a comedy sketch based on what they talked about. So now, let's meet Stuart Rice. So Stuart, welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. I'm so glad you're able to join us this week.
I really appreciate the invitation. I'm really looking forward to this.
And as we heard in the intro, you've had plenty of opportunities to do speaking in a variety of different environments that most people would be just terrified of. But what was your earliest experience of speaking to a crowd?
It had to have been in elementary school. I was not a great thespian, but from a very young age, my goal in life was to be a stand-up comedian. Now, the unfortunate thing about that is I don't think I'm funny enough to be a stand-up comedian. But getting up in front of people and talking was something even at a young age, I was very, very comfortable with. In elementary school, I'd have no problem volunteering to go up and read for the class, which, nobody wants to do that when you're in third grade, go up and read in front of the class, but that was a thing I actually enjoyed doing. And then later on, that my medium changed. I went from talking in front of people to writing, and I did journalism throughout high school. But later on, when I got into the job market, I was drawn to retail for whatever bad reason that was. But I loved the opportunity to be able to talk to people in that platform. And then from there, going into sales training, gathering anywhere from 5 to 150 salespeople and doing training for them. I thrive on it. It is my favorite thing I do.
Awesome. That actually kind of mirrors my path. It's funny how retail just sort of sucks you in at some point, and I served my time there, and it teaches you so much about dealing with people and working with great customers, and the customers will tell great stories about later on.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Those are my favorite stories to tell, are the ones that happened at retail, and they weren't all great experiences, but you learned from each one of them. And there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And I believe from all of my years of retail, wisdom happens, and that's where you learn a behavior because you've had the experience otherwise.
It's like one of the things they say over on the Manager Tools podcast is that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
That is well said.
So how did you actually make that transition from working the floor to teaching folks to work the floor and get into the sales training?
Partially it was accidental. So I worked for a company called Fry's Electronics up in Seattle. I know you're at the ripe old age of 22, was thrust into a purchasing position at Fry's Electronics, where I was responsible for $250 million worth of business. You can ask a lot of questions about, Fry's viability and their particular wisdom in putting people in positions. But yeah, at 22, I found myself in that situation. Part of the thing with being a buyer at Fry's was you had to be ruthless and you had to be heartless. But the other thing is you also had to get in front of all of the salespeople that were in the stores and once a week do presentations for some sort of a sales training of some sort. And so I was constantly volunteering for that. And so that was, my first taste of that. And then from there, I actually created a program where we would do trainings for the public on weekends. On Saturday mornings, I would get one of our esteemed partners to come in and help me with a training and talk about a particular piece of software, which is the department I worked in, and try to, make it exciting. How do you get excited about Microsoft Office? Well, you have someone who knows a lot about Microsoft Office and able to answer, how do I make a letterhead? Things like that. So that's where that happened. And then as I left that company, I was looking for a position where, still in purchasing, where I'd still have an opportunity to kind of be the conduit for knowledge. So the knowledge would all come to me. I'd be able to filter it out and give it off to the sales staff in a way that was easily digestible and allowed them to process the information without getting over inundated. So I worked for a company here in Portland called they're called Standard TV and Appliance, and these were appliance salespeople. So they were very steeped in the appliance culture, but my job was to sell TVs and mattresses. So obviously, if 95% of the business coming through the door is appliances, you really have to filter down and get to the core things that you need to talk about with as a salesperson to a customer. So my job was to really pare down the information so that it was easily digestible, so that these salespeople that once every 20 customers, they would get asked about a mattress, and they had to be able to come up with enough of an answer to be able to sell something. And so that's what I did that's what I made. My main job there was just to do that. I also bought the stuff, but that didn't take very long. It was getting these salespeople that were not necessarily open to it to be open to selling this product. So I did that. And then one of the bedding manufacturers decided to hire me as a sales trainer. And I did that for 12 years.
Well, that's fascinating. What's really interesting about that is you've really unlocked a whole bunch of different challenges in there to sort of unpack. First, convincing folks that there is something they need to learn about mattresses, because unless you're in the field, it's not something you think about more than every 10 or 20 years. And you don't think about it as technology changing, but you still have to get people excited to learn what's new about this and why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's the same thing with toilets, water heaters, any of these things that are just, I mean, how do you romance a refrigerator? There's a story with some refrigerators, and you can always find that way. And that's exactly it, is you want to find a way to convey it in a nice, simple manner, as opposed to having to use a bunch of jargon that causes people's heads to explode. And we've all seen that. I mean, if you were selling stuff at Fry's, I assume it was a technology piece. And how many times did you hear somebody just spout off and just, pardon the expression, throw up on a customer all of the specs without any context, and the customer's there going, well, I guess I got to buy it. I don't know.
Right.
People buy benefits. They don't buy features. They don't buy specs. They really, I mean, this is nothing new. I'm not spouting any good knowledge here.
Well, the thing is, is that it's nothing new to us because we've lived and breathed that. But I think that idea is new to a whole lot of folks that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've got an anecdotal story about this. I did sell computers for a short period of time, and this is actually where I learned it. I learned it early, which unfortunately some salespeople don't. But I learned it very early because in selling computers, at the time, I would ask people, "What do you do on your computer?" And this was back in the early aughts, the late 90s, early aughts. And what do you think the number one answer I got when I asked people, what do you use your computer for? What was the number one answer?
Email.
Gosh, I wish it was that good. I mean, email would have been a great answer. I would have been like, great, now I have something to work with. The number one answer I would get is, I play solitaire.
Oh.
And so when you get that as a response is, I play solitaire, it's like, literally any of the computers here, I don't even know why you're shopping for one.
Right.
So it became, unfortunately at the time, I didn't realize they're still in buying a computer. I can still show them something nicer. And what I did learn is expand their horizons. So instead of asking, what do you currently do? Which is an iffy question at best. What I started asking was, would you be interested in video editing? And that got them to go, what do you mean by that? And then I'd be able to explain it a little bit. And it created a dialogue of, no, I don't think I'd be interested in that. Great. Would you be interested in greeting cards? Because that was a thing back then. So people bought inkjet printers and printed This seems so archaic at this point, but
it's all coming flooding back now.
yeah. But, I would ask about those things. And then, that led into a question about printers. And then I could go over and talk about a printer. And then you had to add all the other stuff. So it really kind of opened my eyes as to the idea of customers. A lot of times some customers are really going to know their stuff. And those are the customers that come in, they tell you exactly what they want. And it's maybe 10% of them that actually do know what they want and do understand what it is they're looking for. And those are the best customers, because it's just like, great, I don't have to do anything. I just, show you around and show you all the good stuff, and you get to make decisions, and it's fantastic. But for the other 85 to 90% of customers, and this is true in professional, when you're doing outside sales versus inside sales, whatever type of sales you're doing, don't assume the customer knows a whole heck of a lot, because a lot of times they go into it and they don't. They know a rough idea of what this does, but they don't actually know what they can do with it, and they don't actually understand most of what you're talking about. So it's really important to kind of to lead with questions as opposed to follow. And I think people have a weird idea of what a qualifying question is. A lot of times people think that that's where you build rapport, and it's not where you build rapport. Qualifying questions are designed to pare down what you're going to be showing the customer, so you're not inundating them with a bunch of options. And so it's always funny when I hear people say that, they're asking qualifying questions like, how did you sleep last night? Or I'm like, that's not a qualifying question, because I'll stick with beds right now. But when you look at beds, like, all of them are designed for sleep. It's not a qualifying question. But asking, hey, are you going to be doing any gaming on this laptop? And they say yes. It's like, well, you need to have a good graphics card. Here are the which games do you play? These are the graphics cards in these laptops that are going to work. So, for me, when we're talking about all of this stuff, it's really important to understand when you're asking a customer a question, they see us as the experts. And so if we ask a question and they don't know the answer to it, or they don't comprehend what the question is, what we unfortunately do is we kind of kill the customer's confidence in making a purchase. And I've seen it time and time again where, what brand of computer do you have right now? And it's like the customer may not even know. It might be emblazoned on the front of their, beige desktop. It might have said Compaq, or it might now say HP, but asking them that question does two things. Number one, you have the possibility that the customer is going to answer with the worst answer ever, which is, I don't know. And the second thing is, it doesn't matter. Whether the customer knows they are getting a 3 gigahertz processor, or they're getting a pocketed coil, or they're getting a super antifreeze refrigerator. I don't know enough about appliances, obviously, but that stuff doesn't matter. What really matters to the customer is when they get it at home, what can their imagination allow them to comprehend this device is going to do, or this thing is going to do. And I think that's when you can create that mind-opening experience for the customer in the store. It allows them to feel better about maybe spending a little bit more money and getting the product that's actually going to be a little aspirational versus whatever's going to get me by. And we've got a lot of products, and in this day and age, most of the products are just going to get you by. But how do we not convince? Because that's not a good word. But how do we open up the eyes of the consumer or the customer that we're sitting across from? How do we get them to open their eyes and realize that there's potential beyond doing solitaire? I think that's the main thing we have to do as people that are consultants to consumers and to customers.
Right. And when you're taking that approach with a customer about helping them see the possibilities and doing your best to not make them feel stupid or embarrassed, and helping them see beyond what they thought possible when they walked in that day, that's almost the same kind of thing you're trying to do when you're speaking from the stage to an audience.
Absolutely. Yes. And I've seen that both ways. I actually just recently got done with my company's national sales meeting. And this is when, the senior staff gets up and they're trying to convey, these are the changes that we're going to be doing. And we have certain people that are very good at conveying that message. And they get up and they're very charismatic. Number one, they're very charismatic. I don't believe that you have to be born with charisma, but they've either A, developed it, or B, were spoken to very well when they were children because they feel very confident up on stage. You just want to listen to them. And they can usually pare down that message and convey it very easily. And it's a crowd of 300 people, and we're all skeptics. So some of them do it very well, and they get people behind them. And, you can hear the chatter afterwards. It's like, you know what? It's going to be hard, but at least we'll be able to do it. Some people get up and they are unable to do that. And what they do is they just confuse the message even further. And you can hear the grumbling afterwards, which is, I don't understand what's happening. I don't know what we're going to do with this. So I think a lot of times with, especially getting in front of a crowd, we talk about you have to have confidence, you have to have charisma. But I think the biggest thing is you just have to be prepared. Improv is hard. And especially when you're doing improv in front of a bunch of people that know their stuff. Now, this is a big difference. They know you're not selling snake oil. You're trying to sell in a program to people that actually know what they're talking about. You have to be very prepared, and you have to kind of think ahead and try to determine what are the things that if I was listening to this presentation, what are the things I would be like, well, that's a bunch of BS. What are the things that I would be able to tell is just fluff? What are the things being said that aren't going to really connect with me, and try to eliminate most of that? And I find that when people use, for instance, and I'm not saying PowerPoint is a bad thing. I think PowerPoint can be an incredible tool. PowerPoint, Keynote, whatever. I'm a Mac guy. But whatever presentation software you're using should accompany what you're saying, not the other way around. And I think for me, there is nothing more groan-inducing than when I can tell someone's obviously reading from a slide and you can tell that they have no conviction over what they're saying. They don't have any ownership over the words that they're using because they're just reading it off of a screen. And you know that if you asked a question and you asked the wrong question, it would break the presentation. So I always feel like that charisma, that really it's that confidence comes from really knowing your stuff. Okay. And I think that is absolutely a thing that even when I'm doing sales training, I've been in that situation where I maybe didn't know as much as I should have, got into the sales training, and I was like, they're going to break me. And I have to use my relationship here to beg for forgiveness.
Right. Yeah, one of the things I used to tell folks who were in the back office was that salespeople on a retail floor won't just sell the product that gives them the highest commission. That's not their number one priority, unlike what most people think. They're going to try to sell the customer on the product that is least likely to make them feel stupid. So they're going to sell what they know. And as a sales trainer, you want to make sure that they know your product better than they know the customer's product. You want to make sure they're better prepared, so they'll just naturally be more comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's very accurate. And that helps build confidence. When I ask salespeople, one of the things I ask salespeople is how do you define your job? Right? Like what is the thing that you do every single day when a customer walks in the door? And the answers range from, I educate the customer. And I'm like, well, no, teachers educate. You make more than a teacher. So maybe let's figure out a different way to to answer this question, because education is good, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily buy at the end. We've all had that customer say, hey, thanks for the education, and then bolted. A lot of times it's like finding a product that satisfies the customer's needs. And it's like, well, kind of, but finding a product that satisfies the customer's needs, Amazon does that. That's not really what, I mean, it's not really difficult to figure out. I need my clothes washed. I need a washing machine. I'll just go to Home Depot and buy that one because it's in my price range. What our actual definition, what I believe the definition of a salesperson is to build the confidence of the customer to a point where they can make a decision. And I don't really care what that decision is. If the decision is yes, great, I got a sale. If the decision is no, I understand that. And that helps me right the ship so that I can reevaluate what it is that I've possibly done wrong, or it helps me evaluate what it was that I was showing the customer so that I can learn from that situation. But I want a definitive answer at the end of my sales presentation. If you're getting more no's than yeses, you're in a lot of trouble. But it should be a thing where the customer feels very comfortable talking to you and very comfortable giving you an answer. The worst case scenario to me is when a customer says, can I get your card? Because I'm always happy to give a card. But if it's just they're going to take a card and throw it away afterwards, that's the worst situation to be in.
Right. I found that in general, the number one way I can help a retail salesperson improve their sales is to just get them to ask a closing question. It doesn't have to be a good one. You know, we can talk about things like, so, you know, shall we go ahead and write up the paperwork? Or would you like to take this one home or this one? Or even if we can just get them to just say, so what do you think? Do you want it? You know, it's better than what many retail salespeople do, where they never actually ask the customer to make a choice.
Yeah, you know, I tell a story in my current position. I tell a story about, you know, the big thing with mattresses. I'll just use mattresses in this example because I have to. The big thing with mattresses right now is not just the mattress. It's the thing that goes underneath the mattress, which is, in a lot of cases, the adjustable base. And I don't know if you've ever experienced one of those, but it's neat. Your head comes up, your feet come up. It'll sometimes massage you. The salesperson I witnessed physically tortured a customer with an adjustable base because the salesperson kept moving the base on the customer. You know, hit the head up, and the customers, you know, screamed because vertigo.
Oh,
and so made it even worse. And then after that, hit the massage button, which vibrates the bed, also enacting the vertigo. But the salesperson at the end of the presentation, even though this person tortured the customer, at the end of it had the gall to say, and for an extra $2,400, you can have that base. And the customer said yes. Now, $2,400 for something that they didn't like is not something, no matter how charismatic you are, you're not convincing somebody to spend $2,400.
right.
But the salesperson had the cojones to offer it to the customer, and the customer said yes. And it's, you know, it's really just about opportunities and seizing every opportunity you get. That salesperson was me. I did this. And I was shocked at the end when the customer said, yeah, I'll take it. Whatever. I wrote it up and we went about our days. But yeah, I feel like that a lot of times people get stuck in the I don't know enough or you know, I don't feel like this customer is going to want this. And you know, we're always worried about the word no in sales. No is not a bad thing. It's for boundaries. It's not a barrier. It's a boundary. And so when a customer says, no, I don't want that, it's like, okay, well, let's get you written up for all the other stuff then. Or it allows you to understand, oh, no, that's too expensive. Or no, that one's too big. or whatever it is. No's not bad. The worst thing you can hear a customer say is, I don't know, because I don't know means I don't have enough information. I don't feel confident with this. I need to go do quote unquote more research, which is them going home or going on their phone and reading every negative review of every product ever available.
Or just going to the store down the strip mall and talking to a different salesperson.
Yeah. Yep. That is definitely exactly what happens.
So there's a lot here that goes into building rapport quickly, about understanding a customer, figuring out how they're going to react to stuff, and giving them an opportunity to react to that. You've taken all of that and have turned that into another side of what you do, and that's with your work with improv and sketch comedy. How did you start doing that?
Well, like I said, from a very young age, I wanted to be funny. But, it's funny. When I was a kid, I always wanted to either be Canadian or Jewish, or a Jewish Canadian, because all my favorite comedians were either Jewish or Canadian. But, I always had a desire to be funny, but I didn't have, quite honestly, I don't have the preparation skills to be a comedian. For a long time, I didn't. I've done some stand-up comedy since, but I didn't realize how difficult it is. Writing a joke is hard, and getting up in front of people is not difficult, but getting up in front of people and saying words that are going to help them laugh, that's difficult. So instead, what I did was I honed my skills in my day-to-day conversations, and all those years spent in retail, just trying to get a customer who is having a grumpy day, trying to get them to laugh. That was always my goal, is if I could get them to laugh, that's probably enough rapport, and I can get to the nitty gritty, and that's getting them the product that they needed. But I had such a fun time doing that, and really it was as with anything, it's practice, and finding a way to be funny without being offensive, finding a way to be funny without being mean, and one of the best ways I found to do it was to make them part of a story. Whatever it was I was showing them, I was trying to build a narrative with the joke and have them play along with it. Could
you go into that idea of building that story a little bit more?
Sure. So, like, for instance, let's say I'm using all sorts of different products. So let's say a vacuum cleaner. Let's say I've got to sell a vacuum cleaner to a customer, and they're talking about how they have a cat and they have lots of fur, and it's like, well, what's great is you can actually use the vacuum on the cat. It's got a feature on it where it won't actually suck the cat up, but it will grab all of the fur off of the cat. And it's amazing how many people catch on to that so quickly and will play along with you. And once you get that, you want to talk about building rapport, is when you can get somebody to do that type of thing with you. It's incredible, because then it's like all the walls are down, and they feel it's a very inclusive feeling. It's like an inside joke. It's like an immediate inside joke. And honestly, it's funny because I talk about improv, but I would probably suggest, before you said anything like that, like, figure out like which of those jokes are going to work and which ones are not, and kind of go from there. Not everybody's quick-witted, but you can give the illusion of being very quick-witted. But I kind of translated that into, I do have a podcast, and what I've done is, I had a friend that I was doing the podcast with, but eventually she decided to leave the show, and I wasn't ready to give up on the podcast. And we did improv sketch comedy on the podcast. So instead, now what I do is I have whoever I deem is interesting. Luckily for me, my audience isn't big enough that they aren't dictating who I find interesting. It's just whoever I find interesting. And so I'll invite people like scientists, or I've had a couple comedians on, lawyers, psychiatrists, whoever's interesting to me, I'll have them come on the show and we talk for about a half an hour, basically building that rapport. But the best is when we do we improvise a sketch based on whatever was talked about in the conversation. Somewhat recently had a couple of filmmakers on, and it was really fun to build this entire narrative off of a story that happened on their set with a horse. So we built this entire story and really fleshed it out. And we were able to encompass so many different things in the conversation into the sketch. But what was amazing is the conversation that happens after the sketch is always way more interesting than almost any other part of it. And that's usually when the microphone's off.
Of course.
Yeah, you've built that rapport. You've finally gotten through all of that stuff, but you've done this, this thing that kind of touches on people being very uncomfortable because they don't know, it's unpredictable. But if you can find a way to guide them through that very easily, it's incredible what it does. And, I tell when people come onto my show, they're like, but I'm not a comedian. And I'm like, thank God, comedians are the worst to work with because they're always looking for the punchline. I like to tell people, don't be funny. You don't have to be funny. It will be funny in the end. Just react as you believe your character would react in this situation. I'll make sure that it comes out sounding funny in the end. And it just, all the walls come down, and it's very personal and it's a fun experience to have with someone. And if you can do that in a sales presentation, or you can do that in a presentation to a bunch of people, if you can have them be part of the whatever joke or part of whatever it is that you're doing versus just telling them things, it's an incredibly different experience.
It's like one of those things, one of those key elements of building rapport is you're sort of building a community. You're building your own tribe, and you can get everybody on the same team. Suddenly they're going to be much more supportive of the other people on their team, which includes you.
Yes, that is very accurate.
So for most of this work, is it primarily you've been exploring comedy through the podcast, or are you performing in clubs or other venues around Portland? I know Portland has a great improv background. I know they had a while ago, they had a strong comedy sports program.
They do. I've not really pursued that. And, I have a little bit, but, yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to sound like such an egotistical jerk right now, but I don't like to perform stand-up comedy for other comics. So I don't go do the open mics, which is what a lot of other people do. So instead, what I do is I try to find situations like fundraisers, or, if a company wants to have some entertainment, I'd much rather write 15 minutes specifically for that audience than have to struggle with who's in the audience tonight, which comics are actually going to pay attention to me, which comics are just going to ignore me the entire time. I've got the microphone experience, so I don't need to have minutes in front of a microphone getting comfortable with the audience. What I actually want to get to is I want to tell jokes that get people to laugh. So I tend to, if it's less than 100 people, I'll think about it. But most of the time I'm trying to do much bigger set. I know that sounds, I'm so good. But the other thing is with the improv, you have to take the classes. And I feel like the classes are absolutely necessary for getting really good at improv. So, and so do the companies that have I believe that those classes are fantastic. I also believe, that sometimes, it's there, sometimes people have to go to college. Sometimes they don't. I've done a lot of primary research, and I've done a lot of that type of stuff. So I've got a very particular set of tools that I use. And it's not that I don't want to learn more. It's just what I got works for me. So I tend to stay away from the stages for improv because I want to do my own thing. And that's been the beautiful thing about having this podcast is that I can do my own thing. And for some reason, people keep listening. So I keep doing it.
Absolutely. That's one of the most powerful things about the podcasting field is that it used to be that as speakers, we had to wait for somebody to give us a stage. Now technology lets us go ahead and make our own stage.
It's true. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. Because how many podcasts do we need? 4 guys sitting around a table drinking beer, talking about pop culture. But yeah, I really do enjoy the podcast. And what's great is my network of people that I've talked to is incredibly big. And I get contacted on a weekly basis for, hey, I'd like to be on your podcast, which is kind of a nifty thing. It's a neat feeling thing to get this constant stream of people that are like, I like what you do. I'd like to do it with you. And it's just kind of incredible, the conversations I had. Recently, I had a conversation with someone who's she's a relationship therapist. And just as a passing comment, she said, that's just how it is when you grow up when your dad's a spy. And it's like, whoa.
It's like, wait, hang on.
Slow
Let's
down.
back up there a moment.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. And that resulted in a 15-minute tangent that was just fascinating. So good. Just always kind of good stuff like that. So I like what I do in my little corner of the internet. It's my favorite. I would like to actually take it and go onto a stage with it. I've been trying to figure out how to turn that into a stage thing, but in the meantime, I enjoy doing whatever.
And I think what's really telling there in that story that is really useful for salespeople and tech folks, as we talked about earlier, the idea that when you live and breathe something every day, you don't think of it as extraordinary. You don't think of it as you think things I'm going to say to this audience, this is just too basic. I need to go to the fancy stuff. But like your guest who's like just lived and breathed the idea of her dad being a spy, it's like, oh, nothing, no big deal. But to somebody who's not from that environment, that is fascinating. And that's important to know. And I think when it comes to our audiences, a lot of folks tend to skip over the basics and fundamentals because that's just stupid basic stuff that everybody knows. And it's not true.
No, it's not true. It's not true. In fact, I've tried to get people away from these quote unquote qualifying questions that they ask, because they always ask questions that are, you either A, have to know something about whatever it is that you're selling / buying, or B, really limit what the customer is going to be looking at. And I don't want to necessarily have that. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to get people to start thinking more along the lines of discovery questions. And discovery questions are not necessarily the customer has to know anything. They're just basically telling what the product does. Would you be interested in video editing? Is a good starting discovery question, because it's like, it begs the question, what do you mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I wasn't a minute ago, but now I'm kind of curious. What do you mean by video editing? Because what computer does email? All of them. But which one of these does, if you want to make a podcast, do you want to make a podcast? Oh, I'm familiar with podcasts. Yeah, I was interested in a podcast. Oh, now we can start talking about which of these computers would be good for making a podcast. So getting away from, are you looking for a wood table? Because, what type of wood are you looking for? You just kind of, you're really limiting yourself. Instead, opening it up and then getting to the qualifying questions after the customer understands what the product is designed to do. Do you want a dining room table that will expand for you? It's like, what do you mean by expanding? Well, you pull out the leaves and all of a sudden now you can sit 8 where you could only sit 4 before. Oh my God, that's amazing. That kind of eye-opening experience, and then get into the qualifying questions afterwards where you're trying to limit what you're going to be showing the customer.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So as you see other speakers or other sales trainers coming in to the environment, you see other speakers taking a stage various places. What do those speakers most need to learn? What are the big mistakes they're making?
Selfishness, when they get on a stage, selfishly thinking that their audience is actually interested in what they're listening to. And I think to me, that's the biggest mistake everybody makes, is that, yeah, I mean, you're the CFO and I got to listen to what you're saying because it really has an impact on our business. But walking around and talking to us like we have to listen it's pompous and egotistical. And I never approach it that way. I mean, I've sat through too many sales meetings, or I've sat through too many presentations that wasn't necessarily that interesting. Being talked to in a way that, like, you have to listen to this, is never a good way to approach a presentation. Take a humble approach. And when you're up in front of people and talking, realize you're taking their time and you're putting them in a situation that they may not necessarily love. Not that you have to beg them to listen, but just keep it in your mind that if you were in the audience at this point, what is it that you would want to hear? Would you want to hear, like, you have to, and you gotta, or would you want that conversation to be inclusive? And it's tough when you're talking to 150 people. How do you make it inclusive? You have to find a way to talk to the individuals within that audience. Not specific individuals, but like get them to reflect, get them to be invested in what you're talking about. And if what you're talking about isn't going to be of any interest to anybody in the audience, you got to ask yourself, is this something I need to be talking about? Or is this an email follow-up?
That is fantastic, Stuart. So if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Well, there's two places. If you're interested in learning more about the podcast and more about improv comedy, or you're interested and you want to be on the show, go to sketchcomedypodcastshow.com. And that's where you can find all of the episodes, all of the artwork, all of the fun. If you're interested in talking sales, or if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you really want to learn more about how to refine a sales process or develop a sales process, I also work with it's a company. I'm a partner in a company called Impactful Sales Solutions, and you can go to impactfulsalessolutions.com and learn more about the types of services we offer. We offer very reasonably priced classes for people just getting into sales. A lot of times it's independent people, like photographers. We have a lot of photographers. We have so anywhere from one person up to like 50 people. We have classes that work for improving sales process and helping non-sales people get really good at customer-facing jobs.
Okay. Awesome. And we'll also have all those links over at 2minutetalktips.com/Stuart. So, Stuart, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Oh, thank you. It's been great.
I hope you enjoyed that sort of bit of inside baseball about retail sales. Be sure to check out the Sketch Comedy Podcast Show and Impactful Sales Solutions to learn more about Stuart and the topics we talked about today. You can find all those links over at 2minutetalktips.com/Stuart. Share this episode with a friend, colleague, or relative by giving them the link 2minutetalktips.com/Stuart. Come back next week to hear from licensed therapist Catherine Aumann as she talks about speaking, books, and hosting local events.
I think the most difficult thing in anything, YouTube, Facebook Live, setting yourself up with speakers somewhere, is getting over your own fear of getting started.
And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.